always articulate attorney, interpersonal communication skills. In this program, you are going to learn to speak the language in digestible chunks. You will also learn how to emphasize key words to make your listener's job easier. You will learn how to end your sentences so that you sound confident. And as part of that challenge, you will learn to eliminate the inflective uptalk of uncertainty. That's our goal. So let's review a little of what we learned about the brain, because now we're trying to coordinate how the brain is thinking with how your voice is speaking. In the previous program, you learned that our brains like information in chunks. We need to chop up what we're saying, if you think of it as a piece of meat, into digestible chunks. Instead of trying to give the listener the entire steak, we're saying, let's cut that steak into digestible chunks as we feed it to the listener so they're able to process it. But the word chunking, I will grant you, has not much to do with language. So let's convert this notion of chunking into phrasing, because those are the chunks of language. Those are the building blocks of how we put the language together. We do not think in one-word chunks. As we think and we speak, it's a phrase at a time. So I've got three instructions, three mantras of self-instruction as a way to give you a very concrete way of conceiving of, first of all, how do you control the pace, chopping up the thought into digestible chunks so that you as the speaker have time to process what you want to say next, because of course in conversation we never know what we're about to say next. It's a constant improvisation, if you will. So how do you get control as the speaker of that ability to roll out an entire thought, often a complex legal thought, but you're going to do that a phrase at a time. So phrasing is our goal. So let's boil it down to this. If you want to be articulate, speak in phrases, not whole sentences. It's that simple. Listen to that again, and listen to the three phrases. Listen to this more as rhythm than as speed. If you want to be articulate, speak in phrases, not whole sentences. So notice I'm not talking about slow down, because that's not the goal. That's not even a desirable goal. It would not be desirable to move your articulator slowly, because you would sound slow, as in slow-witted. And what if you are a fast talker? I'm giving you permission to do that. So let's imagine you're someone who talks very fast, like I'm talking now. Well, the truth of the matter is that while I'm talking pretty quickly. But in between those phrases that are rolling out quite fast, I'm giving myself as the thinker time to answer the question, what's next? So this is not about fast or slow. It's why the words fast or slow aren't very helpful in the context of learning how to moderate the pace at which you're speaking. So there's our first instruction. If you want to be articulate, speak in phrases, not whole sentences. Say that after I repeat it again, and say it in these three chunks. You need to get that solid sense of it's an issue of rhythm. If you want to be articulate, speak in phrases, not whole sentences. Say that in three phrases. So let's look at this as a way to give that even more of a concrete sense of what's already in your head. When do we speak in phrases? Well, citizens of the United States, as one example, always speak in phrases when they say the Pledge of Allegiance. Think about the first sentence of the Pledge of Allegiance. We never say it in a single burst, a whole sentence. We always break it up like this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. That's the rhythm we all use every time we say the Pledge of Allegiance. So could we use that simple idea as a rhythm to help us set the speedometer for moderating the rate of speech? So if we took that simple rhythm, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and turned it into gibberish, just as rhythm, it would be bum 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 bum, dum bum bum, bum dum bum 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 bum. So let's take that rhythm and convert it from gibberish back into this instruction. So that's the rhythm I can use to control the pace that I'm speaking. Listen to that again and say it after me. That's the rhythm I can use to control the pace that I'm speaking. Say it like that. That is the way to get the fundamental control of your thoughts coordinating with your voice and therefore saying it well. Now, I don't for a minute want to suggest that you're going to spend your whole career talking at that pace. It's the way to get initial control, and then inevitably, once you are in that rhythm, you're going to pick up speed. And that's desirable. There's no one pace that covers everything. There are those much more complicated issues that need to be even slower. And there's a whole lot of stuff in that transitional way that we're talking along like I am right now. I don't care if you remember this or not, I'm talking much faster. So I don't mean to imply that that is the rhythm. The Pledge of Allegiance is how you will speak. But here's my suggestion about how to begin. Whether you're talking to a client, whether you're on the phone, whether you're reporting to a senior partner at a big law firm, to say, I want to ease into this to get my brain and my voice coordinated. The analogy I would use is a little bit like a train that pulls out of the station, and it doesn't immediately lurch up to 60 miles an hour. It slowly pulls out of the station, and then as it gets up to speed, it goes much faster. But before you can run, you've got to walk. And before you can speak in entire sentences, you've got to be able to say it in phrases. That's what's going to give you that fundamental control. So if our brains like information in chunks, we're going to use that notion of chunking as phrasing. And we're going to give our listeners that opportunity to process what it is that we're saying. And your listeners need it in phrases as well, because your listeners are engaged in what we could call this echo memory. That your listeners need time to process what you're saying, especially if you as the lawyer are counseling a client who is not a lawyer and you're trying to explain to the non-lawyer some complex legal issue. Well, their brains like information in chunks as well. So if you feed what you're saying to them a phrase at a time, they've got time to process it. There's a name for that processing in cognitive psychology called echo memory, and it is what it sounds like, an echo. As you're talking, what they're doing is echoing back what you said. And depending on the complexity, how much time the echo takes might increase. And if it's something not very complicated, it's more the kind of speed with which we normally talk, we could be going at a much faster tempo. But you have to have that ability to say, just like as a driver, I can speed up and slow down. Because your listener needs that time to process what you're saying. So you're feeding that to them in digestible chunks. That's how we're going to control the way that we phrase the language and suddenly have a concrete way of saying, yes, I'm a fast talker. People have told me my whole life I'm a fast talker. You can't imagine how many times lawyers have said that to me in my career. Oh, I've always been told I'm a fast talker. But no real attempt or success at slowing it down. Here's the way to do it. Speak in phrases, not whole sentences. We got that down. Now, your whole purpose in talking is to get other people to understand you. So how do we do that? What is the key, literally the key, to unlocking the understanding of what you're saying in the mind of the listener? Well, that brings us to emphasizing, because emphasizing is what makes the language come alive. It is the emphasis on the key words that unlocks the meaning. So let's just look at emphasizing in general and its kind of magical ability to transform language. And let's take this utterance. She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. If you read that, you'd say, I know what that means. I'm literate. And I'd say, actually, I understand that you know what it means as a reader of that, but you don't really know what it means until I say it, while emphasizing different words. And the emphasis leads to different meaning. So in addition to moderating your pace, you're trying to add the emphasis to say, let me make this clear to you. And clarity, understanding, comes about because of emphasis. So let's take that simple sentence. She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. And let's play with some different emphasizing. What if I emphasize the first word? She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. The emphasis on that word, she never promised, implies that maybe he did, but she never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. What happens when I emphasize the second word? She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. It's some kind of absolute. What about the third word? She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. There's some kind of waffle going on when we emphasize that word. She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. the invoice, but not the shipment. She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. It would be shipped, but not arrive by Tuesday. And the last word, she never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. Again, another kind of absolute Tuesday. Maybe Wednesday, but not Tuesday. So that's what makes the language come alive. It is the emphasis on those words. So our goal as speakers is to say, if I want your job as the listener to be easier, my job is to, in a literal sense, work harder. When things get complicated, more words need emphasis. Another way to look at emphasis is to say, let's get rid of it. What happens when it goes away? And it sometimes does. Think about those people who speak in such a boring monotone. Let me try to explain something about the importance of language and why emphasizing is so important, and I'll try to make my point by getting rid of the emphasis and just droning on like this. Well, what's missing in that kind of delivery, that kind of flat monotone, is emphasis. We could really describe it as this shape. I'm talking to you in one tone. In fact, you could hum along, hum, and there's the tone in which I'm talking. And when we speak with emphasis, our voices have much more definition up and down. This is like driving across the plains of Nebraska. This, normal emphasis, is like driving through the Rocky Mountains with much more shift and change in altitude. So emphasis is key to understanding. You need to work harder with the language to make the listener understand. So if our first instruction is speak in phrases, let's build on that and say, okay, we've got one other instruction to add to that, and it's this. In every phrase, at least one word gets emphasized. Listen to that again. In every phrase, at least one word gets emphasized. And that's what makes it come alive. But the beauty of the English language is how much that emphasis can shift. I'm going to say it with different emphasis, but the same words. Emphasizing different words gives it a slightly different emphasis. In every phrase, at least one word gets emphasized. Same words, different emphasis. So there is no right or wrong about emphasis in the sense that, oh, you emphasize the wrong word, as much as you need to know that you will help your listener if you emphasize the words that make it clear. So we're feeding them in digestible chunks. We're emphasizing key words. And both of those steps, speak in phrases, emphasize key words to unlock the meaning, is to get to the all-important goal of the understanding on the part of your listener. Whether it's a client or a colleague, that's the reason you're talking, is to achieve that kind of understanding. So there are our two instructions. Speak in phrases and emphasize key words. Once you have control of the pace at which you're talking and the emphasizing that leads to the understanding, we need to add one more awareness to what it is that you do with your voice. And this is an awareness you already have, believe me. This is how you use your voice regularly. But chances are you've never really thought about it with this kind of technical specificity. And I call this the music of speech, or audible punctuating. And I can demonstrate what I mean as to your existing knowledge by simply making some noises. And the noises, these monosyllables that aren't even words, will suggest to you immediately a punctuation mark. Huh? Huh? Right? True? Huh? Well, let's think about that noise for a while, because it's an important noise to understand. Let's slow it down. Huh? I call that the questioning curl, because the musical pitch literally slides up. Huh? But we do it faster than that. Huh? And sometimes with the word, right? True? Okay? Huh? So our ears hear that, and we understand that, yeah, I understand that that noise alone, that curling upward, huh, implies a question. Isn't this a different noise, implying a different fundamental response and therefore a different punctuation mark? Huh, huh, wow, cool. You know, that going up, that being up, huh, which is different than the slide, huh, but jumping up, huh, wow, cool, is a noise we make as a kind of exclaiming. And isn't that a different mark from this? Huh, 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 huh. There's something about that going down that implies the finality or the conclusion of a period. Huh. Well, what do we make of that? Just those marks alone, when you think about it, are the audible punctuation that we all use all the time without ever thinking about it. But think about, as a writer, how incredibly important it is to know how to punctuate what it is that you're writing, and to know whether it's time for a question mark or a period. How, especially in legal writing, exclamation marks are probably not going to be a very important part of what you're doing, although we may email often with a lot of exclamation marks after we've had a wonderful meal. But fundamentally, we want to think about two things: the question mark, huh, and the period, huh. And let's start with the period, because to me, just like as a writer, there are so many periods on a printed page for a logical reason. It identifies the end of the thought, period. So let's think about that sound, that going down the steps. In fact, that's what I call that, walking down the steps. Now, as to the music of speech, literally, we're descending to a lower pitch. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Now, think about how you do that every time you say, for example, the Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone says the final phrase, with liberty and justice for all, with that inflective pattern, right? Say it with me. With liberty and justice for all. With liberty and justice for all. No one has ever said the pledge with a question. With liberty and justice for all? It's not a question. And although it might be worthy of an exclamation mark as an utterance, no one says, with liberty and justice for all. That has a kind of used car salesman quality. When we walk up the steps, I guarantee it. So that walking down the steps with liberty and justice for all implies, period, I'm done. Another example you've heard a million times but never put it into this musical context, understanding the speaking voice. Think about how every newscaster, as a way of signing off and indicating that they are done with their report, they do the same kind of walking down the steps. Brian Johnson, ABC News, New York. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Period. I'm done with that. And they never go up. Brian Johnson, ABC News, New York. Unless it's New Year's Eve. Or Brian Johnson, ABC News, New York? Is that where I am? So that walking down the steps, that fundamental descending to a lower pitch, has an enormous value in interpersonal communication. Because first of all, it identifies, just as the period does on the printed page, the obvious end of the sentence. And frankly, it is the sound of finality. At the same time, it is the sound of certainty, period. So, could we put that simple audible punctuation, that walking down the steps, into your conversational style, but in a very conscious way? So you're going to end conclusively, because that is the sound of certainty. Now, it has a couple of benefits. It makes you sound like you know what you're talking about. And it buys you time to think, period. So imagine how on a printed page, we come to the end of a sentence, period, space, new sentence with a capital letter. Well, that space is that silence as a speaker between sentences. That very momentary silence. It's not a pause. It doesn't last for many seconds. It's often a second or usually less, where we come to the end of a sentence. And then the next sentence continues. After that sentence, there's another one. But we walk down the steps, so that, just as I bet you've never been critiqued as a writer with someone saying to you, too many periods on that page. Usually it's the, boy, that's a long compound sentence. Could it not be broken up into two sentences with a period somewhere instead of a comma? Same thing applies to speaking. Walk down the steps. You not only will sound certain, it will buy you time to think. So let's put those three mantras together, because this is the way to be the always articulate attorney. To control the pace, to make it meaningful, and to buy yourself time to think and sound like you know what you're talking about, here are the three simple steps. Speak in phrases, emphasize key words, and walk down the steps. So what if we just apply that to many sentences? Let me just improvise for a moment. I'm going to talk to you a phrase at a time, emphasizing key words and ending by walking down the steps. The next sentence begins, I'm once again speaking in phrases, and then walking down the steps. So it gives you a very concrete control of the pace, speak in phrases, the meaning, emphasize key words, and the ending by walking down the steps. Now here's what we want to avoid. And frankly, especially if you're a young lawyer trying to transition out of that kind of college speak into professional talking, here's something to avoid. I've gone often to law firms where I will be approached by the person in charge of professional development who will say some version of this. You know, the managing partner just came to me and said, could you get these young lawyers to stop talking like teenagers? So let's look at that uptick of uncertainty and why it's such a problem. Well, back to just think about that music and think about how differently you come across if everything you say has this quality of I'm not really sure of myself, because the sound is that of a guy who questions every phrase that he says. So not only does it project some sense of, I don't know what I'm talking about, in fact, I question every statement that I make, but at the same time, it literally, in a musical sense, leaves you dangling, and therefore it's very hard to not, after that rising inflection and the questioning curl, put in the noise or that questioning curl, like often is followed by the thinking noises, the ums, the likes, and the you knows. So you've got to get rid of that questioning curl. You've got to get rid of that uptick of uncertainty. And of course, it's just an awareness where this begins. Do you do it? Well, I don't know, but perhaps you don't either. So you now need to hear yourself and realize that much more often than you intend, you're using that kind of inflection and it's not what you want. Think about if I introduced myself and I simply said in this program, greetings, my name is Brian Johnson and I'm here to talk about my expertise in interpersonal communication. And you'd think, I don't think you have much expertise because everything you say sounds like a question mark. Everything you say sounds like you're not very certain of it. So you've got to raise your awareness to whether or not you do that. But here's the fix. You don't say to yourself, stop doing it. You simply tell yourself what the fix is, which is to walk down the steps. So that's our goal, to put the music of speech, that to work in a very concrete, technical way. Speak in phrases, emphasize key words, and walk down the steps. So let's sum up what you've learned in this program and review what you want to say to yourself. So talk to yourself and say, control your pace by speaking the first sentence in phrases. Say that. That's our first instruction. Secondly, hear the silence between phrases. Use it to think. Say that and do that. Next instruction. To end conclusively and sound certain, walk down the steps. Say that and do that. And finally, if you hear the uptalk, go down. Do that. That will give you control of your voice.